Hi everyone. We're just giving it a minute or two to get maximum people in before we actually make a start. But in the meantime, I just want to welcome you all to the webinar. It is the fifth in our series of currently 15 webinars that we're holding throughout the year, most of which are in lunchtimes, and they're all to do with our Year of Green activity and having specific highlights on areas that we know of interest or impact for our members. So the webinars that we've had to date have been, of course, the launch webinar. We've had a local government specific highlight webinar. We've had a health webinar. We've had women and climate change webinar. And we've got this one today, which will be our fifth. And the next two are going to be about the specific impacts on our energy members and then in education. So look out for those. If you've missed any, they are all recorded, including this one. And then usually the very next day, they'll be up on our website so that people can catch up in their own time. We never underestimate that this is your lunch break and your working time. And so we aim to use that time as wisely as we can. So we will have time at the end for questions, hopefully at least 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A. You'll notice that the cameras and microphones have been switched off, and there isn't a chat function as such because we can't afford for any technical difficulties when we've only got quite limited time. But if you could put your questions that you have and that you'd like to put to our panelists in the Q&A box towards the end, we'll try and get through as many as we can, group them together if that helps us get through more sort of topics. So as you go along, if you have any questions that you want to get put as part of this session, then do just pop them in there and I'll probably remind you of that in between times. So, okay, I think probably we're ready to make a start. But first of all, I'll introduce our two speakers today. So I'm very pleased to say this is a webinar that has been asked for across the board of our membership. Every webinar we have, this topic comes up. So very glad that we're here today. But our first speaker will actually they might come in a different order. Our two speakers today are Kate Jones, who's a policy officer at UNISON, and she leads on our AI and digitalisation work. UNISON's been building our work in this area significantly over the past 2 years, which you may or may not noticed. It's as digitalisation efforts ramp up across the UK public sector and more members are experiencing these tools in their workplace. Kate looks at how AI affects workers, the implications of AI in the public sector, how it might change society and the economy, as well as the broader ethical issues around AI, including its environmental impacts, which of course she's here to talk about today. And then we have Tom Hegarty, who's the head of communications at an organisation called Foxglove, which many of you may well have heard of. Certainly Unison has worked with them before. With a wealth of experience in political engagement, he's going to be talking to us today about specifically, again, the climate impacts of AI. But just to give you a little bit of a background, Foxglove is a small organisation, but it punches well above its weight, standing up to tech giants' overreach, challenging the unethical use of data and discriminatory algorithms. And they were also one of the first organisations to highlight the dangers of cozying up to Palantir, which I think more recently everyone's begun to realise and get on the same page with those concerns. But Tom is here today specifically to talk about AI and its impact on the environment. And without any further ado, I'm going to pass to Tom to carry on and introduce himself.
That's an incredibly intimidating and kind welcome, Michelle. Thank you. Yes, so my name's Tom and I'm from Foxglove, which, as Michelle says, is a non-profit, and we have the somewhat optimistic goal of trying to make tech work more fairly for everyone. As regards the climate impact of AI, I think that it probably makes sense to say right at the top that Foxglove doesn't really have a position on whether or not generative AI is a good or bad thing per se. I imagine Kate probably actually can speak to that in a lot better detail than I can. But I don't think we need to, because the reason that Foxglove has been concerned about the impact of AI on the climate I guess beginning in probably around 2024 was specifically due to the infrastructure of AI, which is to say hyperscale data centers. So we started looking into the potential environmental and resource costs of hyperscale data centers around the end of 2024. And the first thing I think it's fair to say that we realized from starting to dig into it was there is a real dearth of good, public, transparent information that is verifiable about the resource costs of these things, at least explicitly as regards the UK. You can look around the world, which is what we did, particularly at the United States and particularly in Virginia, at the impacts that are being recorded so far in terms of new carbon emissions, water being used primarily for cooling, but also, well, I'll come on to that in a minute, and then just the sheer power use of these things. And we just couldn't find any good verifiable information. So the first thing that we did was ask the data center developing companies themselves and ask what is going on. And we got a whole load of nothing back, other than sort of PR spin saying that, well, most data centers in the UK don't use direct water cooling. I suppose just, to spell out a bit why that is a particular concern up until now, and arguably still now, data centers tend to use a vast amount of water for what's called direct evaporative cooling, where you just blast cold water, steam into the data center to cool down these massive server ranks that are boiling hot all day to power all manner of things, but more and more likely in future to power generative AI. As I said, we got almost nothing back. So the way that we tried to tackle that problem was by asking water companies themselves via FOI, Freedom of Information requests, because technically, because it's a public service that's being provided, even though it's by a private company, they do have some responsibilities via transparency that you can get at via a Freedom of Information request. So that's what we did, and we got, I would say that the responses that we got back were patchy, but they did show indeed that a huge amount of water was being used by data centers in the UK. But even the numbers that we did get back would be a massive underestimate of the problem, because only about half of the water companies in the UK came back with figures at all. And by far the biggest was from Thames Water, which obviously provides water for London and the south of England, where most data centers are clustered at the moment. And even though those figures were much bigger than all of the other figures that had been presented by every other water company that came back to us, they were also 3 years out of date. And that was 3 years out of date in 2024. So that would be from how much water data centers were using in 2021. Now, obviously, as anyone who watches the news will know, there's been a massive proliferation in the amount of data centers and indeed the compute that comes out of data centers that is required. So figures that come back, from 3 years ago just aren't going to bear any relation to the picture today. So I just share that as an example of the sheer dearth of a lack of good information about these things, which is the first problem that I think we have to deal with as people who might be trying to even get like a proper idea of the kind of impact that AI could have on the climate. So what do we do next? We kept digging into this and trying to investigate and find out what the most effective way of trying to get a handle of this would be. And we started looking more and more at individual planning applications. Which is to say, when the data center developer comes to a local authority and asks, and I realize there may well be planning officers on the call here who I'm definitely telling you things that you already know, so do forgive me. But so you want to build a data center, you submit your application to the local authority, and then that'll be considered by them about whether or not you can build it. Straight away, you're into a massive problem, which is that data centers at planning level are classified at what's called B8. That's the classification of the planning segment that they fall into. Now, B8 is usually things like big warehouses, like big empty warehouses full of, what have you, whether it be rocking horses or anything else that you might be wanting to sell. Now, obviously, a big empty warehouse full of, I don't know why I chose rocking horses, but full of any kind of goods at all is going to not really need that much power or water or likely produce that many carbon emissions. So if you're a planning officer, or indeed you're a councillor sitting on a planning committee, as if you're just told that and it's in the middle of a list of other applications, more often than not, you're going to go, yeah, fine, great. We probably need warehouses around here. That's cool. It's only afterwards that you would realize that, in fact, this data center, which is a gigantic data hall full of servers roasting hot all day that have to be supplied with loads of power, huge megawatts of power, 24 hours a day. That is quite a different proposition to a normal B8 warehouse. So straight off, you have this massive misleading loophole right in the middle of the planning law about how data centers can be approved. And unfortunately, that loophole, and again, this dearth of information, appears to be typical rather than an accident. There also appears to be no common standard over the amount of reporting that you have to do when you put in your application to build a data center over how much water it will use, or how you back up your claims about how much water it will use, or how much power it will use, or how many new carbon emissions will be created as a result of that power being used. Now, that's not to say that there is nothing put in these applications. It is to say that it seems to be completely almost at random in what each data center developer will put into their application. And at the moment, despite the fact that these are massive new infrastructure projects, there is no mandatory need to do what's called an environmental impact assessment, which is the sort of baseline thing that you would normally do if you wanted to, I don't know, build a massive new road, or build a new bit of railway, or build a new power station, which is the kind of massive infrastructure project the government itself is saying data centers deserve to be qualified against. So again, what do we do here? Well, Foxglove is obviously, in the ways that I've described, to some extent a campaigning organization and a non-profit that does investigations. But I think the main kind of special source that we have is our amazing strategic litigation team, led by our co-executive director, Rosa Curling. And so we decided that the best way to tackle this problem would be to look at a few of the particularly egregious examples of where a data center had been forced through. And so we settled on a data center application in Buckinghamshire called Woodlands Park, which is the site of an old refuse site for any of you who may be in Buckinghamshire. And by the standards of new major hyperscale data centers, this is technically on the small side at just 90 megawatts. Now, obviously, 90 megawatts is, in any other circumstance, a huge amount of power that you could never call small or insignificant. But compared to some of these data centers, like the one at Elsham in North Lincolnshire, which I think is the biggest by power demand, at least, that is going through in the UK at the moment, that's about a gigawatt. So in comparison to that, Woodlands was on the small side. But the interesting thing about Woodlands was that had been turned down twice by the local council. It had said, no, you can't do this. But then that one had been taken in by the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, which was Angela Rayner at the time. And she had overruled that decision and said, no, we are going to go ahead with this. And in the decision document that she was required to publish as demonstrating why she had made that decision, there was only one paragraph in the entire thing that even referred to the environmental cost of data centers at all. So again, that's the key point: lack of information. You're dealing again and again and again with these massive gaps where we should have the information we need to make decisions about the climate impact of AI in real terms. So we decided that wasn't good enough. And we brought that to what's effectively a judicial review, but in planning law is called a planning review, saying that that's not good enough. You need to have much more information than that in your decision. If you're going to overturn the will of the local council, you need to set out your reasoning much better than that, and you need to do an environmental impact assessment. So we were all set to take that to the High Court in London, and that's what we were going to do at the beginning of January this year. But on the Monday of the week where that case was meant to go ahead, we got a letter from the government saying, oh, well, actually, we've looked again at the data center developers' application here, and the various mitigation measures that they say they put in place so that they wouldn't need to do an environmental impact assessment are all non-legally binding. And in the words of the government's legal department, that was a serious logical error, because of course it is. Like, how can you, what is the point in mitigation measures that you don't have to do an impact assessment if none of them are legally binding? You wouldn't have to do them. So we thought, great, I mean, an outbreak of sanity at last. And we started to put together what's called a consent order, which is just basically, and again, apologies if I'm telling lawyers in the room things you already know. It's just basically a document that says that everyone involved in the case agrees that this has been resolved and we don't need to use any more of the court's time. And the government said, yes, great. Council, who had to be a party to the case, said, yes, great. But the data center developer, which is a company called Greystoke, for reasons best known to themselves, said no. And that means that we were in the slightly strange position of having to go to that hearing, despite the fact that the main party to the case, the government, had said, we concede this case, there's no need to go ahead with it, and argue against it anyway. But the judge agreed with all three of our grounds and said they were arguable and they deserved to go to a full hearing. And he rejected Greystoke's argument that it was not. So there we go. The government effectively conceded that you should not be able to say we don't need to do environmental impact assessment unless the grounds that you have done to do so are legally binding. Now, that is obviously the first step in what is going to have to be a very long process of establishing legal precedents in these kinds of cases. We think that in of itself is not good enough. That this should just be mandatory, that you have to do environmental impact assessment if you're going to build a major infrastructure project in this country at all. Because again, how else do we know if we're making these decisions with all the facts that we need to make them? And that sort of brings us up to date, but I'll leave you with one final thing. Obviously, there's a lot of news around at the moment. So when this story came out at the weekend, I can understand that it was only really reported on by The Telegraph in quite a small piece and Computer Weekly. But basically, over the weekend, it was announced that there was going to be another data center in Buckinghamshire. And this one, quite a bit bigger. This is going to be 400 megawatts of power. But the developer in this case had submitted a letter to the government saying that it didn't want to put an application for this. It wanted what's called a development consent order under the guise of this data center being a nationally significant infrastructure project. And again, what that basically means, if you don't know, is it's meant to be a thing like a new major motorway or an airport, or something like that, something that is it's considered so big and important to the country that local councils aren't allowed to say no to it. The government gets to decide. And the government had said that they were going to do this last year. They were going to start treating data centers as NSIPs, as these huge infrastructure projects. But it said, don't worry, what we're going to do to make sure this isn't abused is we're going to publish a national planning policy statement explaining the criteria for how these things will work. We've been waiting for that policy statement to be published since before Christmas, and there is still no sign of it. It's still completely missing. However, they are now starting to roll out and do these things, despite the fact that there is, again, no criteria, no information for whether or not we know if this is a fair application or not. So in a funny way, well, it's not that funny, it's that same pattern repeating itself again. And not only would this be the first data center in the country to be brought through in this way, where the council effectively can't say no because it's an NSIP, but it is also the first one that I know of that will be powered entirely by new fossil fuel gas turbines on site to the tune of 400 megawatts of power. Now, obviously, I don't need to tell anyone here that is a gigantic amount of new carbon emissions that will be blasted out into the air in this part of Buckinghamshire, and no councillor, no one in the area will be able to do a damn thing about it because it's being put under this NSIP process. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds to me completely and utterly unfair and undemocratic and ridiculous. And so I think if you would agree, if that feels the same to you, then I would encourage you to do everything you can to get involved in your local area. See if there's a data center being built. See if your local chapel or Union Chapel is doing anything about this. And if there is anything that Foxglove can do to help you in that, then absolutely let me know. I'll do anything I can to help. And I think I can probably leave it there, if that's all right.
Thanks, Tom. That was really illustrative of the situation we're in, and there was some of the stuff there that I hadn't realised. Things had moved on even since I was last looking at it. It's a fast-moving area. Okay, so that takes us on, I think, usefully to Kate, who, as I mentioned, is our UNISON's lead officer for this area. So over to you, Kate.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I am UNISON's AI policy lead. I'm a policy officer in the policy team, and I'm just going to share a PowerPoint with you. So bear with me 2 seconds while I do that, and then we'll get started. Okay, cool. Tom just spoke brilliantly about everything Foxglove is doing, and I will probably make this point several times over the course of this presentation, but please, if you're not already, sign up to Foxglove's emails, their newsletters. I get them to both my work email and my personal email, and they are just doing such brilliant work on such an important issue. And what I'm here to talk to you guys today about is what Unison can do about it, and really specifically what members and reps can do about it, specifically in terms of public sector digitalisation and when your employer decides to bring AI into your workplace. So I'm only going to skim over this because obviously Tom's already made it really clear that AI and digitalisation has such a huge environmental cost. But just putting it in some basic statistics, the studies really vary on this, but one report says that a ChatGPT query uses 10 times more electricity than a Google search. Data centres are up to 2.5% of UK energy, which they're expecting to rise fourfold by 2030. And again, the water use and the toxic e-waste produced by AI hardware, the environmental impact is just really devastating in so many ways. And before I move on, I always want to make the point that our government is not incentivized to think about this because the environmental cost of AI is nearly entirely felt by the global south. These data centers are being built and they're going to perpetuate climate change. And ultimately, we are not the people who are going to feel the impacts of climate change in the immediate or medium term. And then sort of relatedly, UK data centers are actually being built in areas are already classed as seriously water stressed. And I don't actually know if Buckinghamshire is seriously water stressed, but we have all these areas of the UK that are going to be severely impacted, more so perhaps than London or the people making the decisions. So I always want to make that really obvious that this is a justice, fairness issue as much as anything else. So why is it a Unison issue? And because you're here today, I actually don't think I need to spend too much time on this. But the environmental impact of AI is a massive issue because we really care about the environment. As a union, as you all have seen through the Year of Green activity and all the brilliant work that Michelle does, Unison and our members are so committed to climate and a just transition and actively campaigning on those issues in our workplaces. Specifically in terms of AI and our employers, public sector employers are legally required to reach net zero. And as I'm sure Tom's section will have convinced you, AI critically endangers that, particularly through the supply chain. So an employer procuring AI tools isn't necessarily directly burning fossil fuels themselves, but they are having a significant impact on the environment through their supply chain. And this is something we call scope 3 emissions. And I might come on to that a little bit later. I don't know if it's a term everyone will have grappled with before. But when organizations measure their carbon footprint, they have scope 1, which is them boiling fossil fuels themselves, essentially. Scope 2, which is them purchasing energy, which then means the burning of fossil fuels. And third, which is everything else, including the indirect emissions in the supply chain. And it is so important that we talk about this in terms of public sector net zero, because they are just as liable or responsible for the emissions made by AI as they were if they were burning those fossil fuels themselves. We can't kick things down the supply chain. We need public sector employers to take responsibility for the impacts of the decisions they make in procurement. And it's also a Unison issue because reps are in the room when procurement decisions are heard. And that's actually what I'm mainly going to be talking about today. What reps can do when they're in the room to talk about AI. But before I get onto that, I wanted to make some quick points about what individual members can do day to day. Before I do that, I do want to stress the limits of individual responsibility, both in terms of the impact that can be made and in terms of the weight you should take on. The biggest difference in all sort of environmental mitigation work is made by collective bargaining, campaigning, and systemic change. It is a lie that was started in the 90s by companies who didn't want to cut their emissions, so they told us to recycle. Always remember that it is not your responsibility. It is about systemic change and your employers and the people above them changing their patterns. However, we can still reduce our personal environmental impact. And that's why I've pulled these sort of examples out of ways you can, if you are using AI at work, mitigate your personal environmental impact. Number one is, do you need to use AI? You probably don't in a lot of use cases, particularly if you're a local government employee who, much like nearly all office employees nowadays, has had Copilot downloaded onto your laptop. And suddenly you can really easily click and use Copilot. You can do that, but a way to mitigate your environmental impact is to maybe consider whether you have to and whether actually you can do that task using Google or other resources. And then if you do have to use AI, anyone who's used different generative tools will have seen that there's often a little button at the bottom that lets you flick between the models you can use. And they all have really fancy names and numbers after them. But basically, the lowest version you can use for the task that you need to do, if you're just searching the web, you don't need to use the really fancy model that's put together for people who are coding and building AI systems of their own. Use the smallest model that will do your job, and it's usually smaller than you think. Write clear, well-structured prompts. Every time you re-ask ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot a question in the same prompt, it does all of that thinking again. It burns all of the same energy over and over again. So write it all up in one and submit it. And if you want to ask it a question again, maybe start a new chat, because the more you build up their queries, the more complicated they get, the more power they're using. And that's covered in the queries in one conversation. And the last one is, maybe don't use AI to generate images or videos if you don't really explicitly have to. Firstly, because we're trade unionists and AI generating images and videos is ripping off artists, and no government is doing enough to protect creative workers from their creative content being stolen by these companies. But second, because it uses so much more energy than text-based prompts. So please be really mindful when you're using it for anything that's making visual content. Okay, so beyond individual members, I want to turn to what we can do as trade unionists, as reps, bargaining on the environmental impact of AI. And I can announce that on the Green Unison campaign page, there is now a bargaining guide that I've put up, which is intended to supplement the bargaining on green issues in the workplace guide, which I'm sure you've all seen, was last updated in November 2025. This information will all be integrated into the next version when it's updated this year. But until then, you can access this addendum, which goes through all the specific ways you can incorporate concerns about AI into your bargaining on the environment in your workplace. And what I'm just going to go through are some of the principles outlined in that and the things to be thinking about. So the first steps, the first thing you really need to be doing is find out which AI tools members are already using, and check if your employer has any AI strategy or digital transformation plan. They genuinely might do. Many public sector organizations do. It's just often very limited to what extent those plans are being followed or being distributed to staff and trade unions. And something that's really important is find out whether any environmental impact assessment has been made before AI has been procured. And then, and hopefully we'll go through as we go how you might go about this, but make the connections between your employer's existing net zero targets or climate action plans, and like really sit there and draw, well, you've committed to this by this year, but you've also bought this LLM to roll out across the whole council. that's directly contradicting that commitment. And last, I put this in purple because I've dedicated so much of this presentation to bargaining. I didn't want to do like a full slide on this, but actually the like bedrock of this work, I would say even more so than usual union work, is organizing. Because the thing about AI is that it is a new issue and not everyone understands it. And a lot of people are actually scared to like talk about it because they don't feel like they know enough. And as someone who works full time on trade union reactions to AI, the biggest thing I want to say to everyone is you are qualified to talk about the impacts of AI. You are as qualified as anyone else. And really importantly, you are definitely as qualified as your employer, who is not the head of an AI company and probably understands the actual specifics of the AI tools they're procuring as much as anyone else, which is to say, not very well. So please organize your members, do surveys, raise it at meetings, and circulate our work. I've made a briefing on AI if you're interested in like the policy ramifications. There's a part of our website called the AI Hub where you can get some basic questions answered and get in touch, and campaign actions. And this is the second time I'm going to say it. There's Foxglove. There are loads of campaigns doing really brilliant specialist work on this. And they often have actions that would be great for our members to throw their collective weight behind. And before I move on, something that's really important when we're bargaining on AI is approaching AI with nuance, which is actually annoying that we have to do this when the companies themselves aren't doing that with any nuance. They're going, AI lads, it's going to solve everything, don't worry about it. And what we need to approach it as is going, well, no, like there's a massive difference between an AI tool that's being used in medical imaging and is meaning we can, diagnose certain conditions before others, and me being told that I can use Copilot to produce my policy documents a little bit quicker. What we need to do is really seriously engage with specific use cases and approach our employers with that in mind, and not try and have our AI statement is this, and instead go, not go, we don't like it or we do like it, but instead go, these are the specific use cases you are proposing, and this is what we think about that, and adopt the most nuanced, considered approach possible that really engages critically with what these tools are doing, the impact they're having, and whether they're needed. And basically do the work that often employers aren't doing, because the more we do it, the more they'll do it. Okay. So in terms of making the case, all of this is in the guide that's now on the website if you want to go download it. And obviously we can circulate the presentation after if you want to. But some key arguments you can make with your employer. First up, reiterating a point that I've already made, public sector employers cannot credibly claim to be working towards net zero while they're ignoring emissions embedded in their digital supply chain. And frankly, either they don't realize it's happening or they're hoping that we don't catch on. And that's where we have to catch on and go, no, this is unacceptable. This is, if you are not thinking about the environmental impact of your AI tools, you are abandoning all the commitments you have already made. And they have made commitments that they have to legally follow. So that's number one. And then relatedly is that the scope 3 emissions are part of the employer's carbon footprint, and digital procurement, just because it doesn't feel like it's there, just because it doesn't have that tangible physical presence that like procuring office furniture might have, is not different from any other supply chain decision. And that's where it is really important, if you have time, to maybe go look at the policy briefing I wrote, which looks particularly at how really terrible AI supply chains are, both for environmental impacts, but also for labor abuses, and how AI is basically built on unfairly paid, unfairly treated workers across the global south. And then lots of your employers here will be making the case for climate action to their communities, and telling them that they need to save the environment. And credibility is about getting our own house in order first. And then lastly, and this is specifically about how to make the case for union involvement in AI decisions, is that employers keep rolling out AI without consulting workers. And obviously, I have a million objections to that as a trade unionist. But I also have the objection of logic, which is that if you're bringing in a tool to revolutionize if you will, people's work, why aren't you talking to the workers who do that work so that it goes well? The people who use the tools every day and actually do the work are going to be the ones to identify waste and inefficiencies and when things are unnecessary and when they can be done better. And it is directly in the employer's best interest from like every point of view to involve unions and their workers when they are deciding whether to use AI tools and which ones to use. And that should definitely form part of your thinking. I've divided the bargaining asks into, I think, 4 or 5 slides. I won't dwell on them too long because, like I said, it's all in the guide on the website. But a key one is around transparency and reporting. So you should be asking your employer to disclose as like a basic principle, first line, tell us what you're using. You need to know, and they genuinely may not know. So that's like a first step. You need to know what AI tools they have procured and are in use. And then you can request information, if there is any, on the environmental impact of those tools. And then in terms of other reporting, we'll come on more to contract management, but we think Unison believes that it should be part of public sector contracts that any suppliers of AI platforms and digital services provide environmental impact data as part of their contracts. And we shouldn't be procuring from AI companies that don't know or can't tell us what environmental impact they are having. 2, then relatedly, is procurement. Push for environmental criteria to be built into AI procurement frameworks from the very beginning, alongside things like cost and whether it will work. Ask that procurement officers request data on all the environmental impacts before these contracts are signed. And this is really important, this third point. Get a formal right to be consulted as a union on significant new AI or digital tool procurement decisions before they are finalised. And this is important not just from an environmental impact perspective, but from the perspective of all of Unison's work on AI. Workers need to be involved when these tools are brought in. And it's something we are campaigning for, as I'll touch on later, to be brought into collective bargaining formally, so that when new AI tools are brought in, trade unions, workers need to be consulted, which is already the case in several European countries. In Germany, you cannot bring an AI tool in without negotiating and bargaining with trade unions. We want that too. But before we get that to happen on a national scale, you can bargain for it to happen in your workplace. And lastly, I wanted to flag that it's really important to favour providers who can show progress on sustainability, but we do need to be really careful of greenwashing, because there are so many companies who will put up pictures of wind turbines on their website and say, God, lads, it's all renewable, it's all great, we're saving the planet, look at all this climate modelling we're doing, but then don't know what impact they are having on the environment. So that's a really important thing to flag. Next, which is in the guide, both bargaining asks 3 and 4, integrating it into existing green work. So that means making sure that AI is reflected in the employer's net zero and climate action plans. So get those plans reviewed so they include AI-related emissions. Push for targets that cover the environmental impact of AI platforms. And this is really pivotal. Ensure that those plans are reviewed at least annually. The scale of AI, what is happening digitally in the world, is changing at such a fast rate. We cannot do the thing that often happens, which is we have a policy, it's made, and then it sits there for 5-10 years. We really need to be on top of this and understanding, as your employer will understand themselves when they tell you why we need to be using AI, it's moving fast. And if it's moving so fast that we need to use it, we need to be updating our policies the whole time too. And lastly, on this, if there is a joint environment and just transition committee, it should be formally added to those terms of reference, and that committee should get regular reporting from the employer on AI usage. And if you don't have one of those committees, maybe use the vast, consequential, unbelievable impact of AI on the environment as a reason why you should have one and why it should all be being put through a committee. And then final bargaining ask is training and awareness. Staff should receive training on AI, just generally. This is a big part of Unison's overall campaigning on AI, which is about workers being given the knowledge and the expertise to use them, but also training on the environmental impact of AI tools and how to use them more sustainably. Just like that little slide I went through with you at the beginning, that's really important just for making sure that everyone is using their tools as responsibly as possible, if you will. Next, seek union involvement in developing any staff guidance on sustainable AI use. If the employer is putting out a guide, make sure that unions are feeding in and making sure that that reflects actual practices and stuff like that. Training and facility time to work on this issue. And lastly, and this is sort of like an overall thing, ask that environmental awareness is built into any AI implementation process from the outset. So, when they're bringing in AI, we need to be thinking about this stuff and particularly thinking about how members are aware of the impact of AI from the very beginning. Because so much of AI bargaining is decided by the higher ups and then comes a bit further down the track. And if we're lucky, they go, "Ooh, now we've bought it. What do you guys think about it?" Unacceptable. We need to be involved from the beginning in all of this work, and really responsibly engaging with the questions and issues at hand here. So I'm just about at time if we want to do 20 minutes for questions, but I just wanted to come on to some of the campaigning and lobbying work that we're doing around the environmental impact of AI, and really specifically what our asks are. So as a policy team, we've been talking, oh, my PowerPoint has froze. There you go. Things that we need to be demanding and that people like Foxglove are already demanding, but we need to throw our weight behind as a union, are the mandatory reporting, as Tom said, of energy, water use and emissions by all data centres. We need environmental impact assessments before any new AI infrastructure is approved. These are basics, and it's kind of worrying that we need to be demanding them, but they're not happening. So we need to be getting behind this, like, as a matter of urgency. This one sounds really boring: integration of AI demand into national water resource planning. But this is a really terrifying thing. Hang on, I actually have this written down. Okay, I've lost it. We're going to run out of money. We're going to run out of water by 2030 or 2050. This is in the guide. I'm not doing my best at remembering a statistic. Basically, there's all the water has been considered up till 2030, and they're like, shh, we just about might be able to provide the UK with water, just under these conditions, but it's going to be tight and we might run out. And then at the bottom of this government document, it says, we have not factored data centres into this. We've not taken that into account at all. So we are going to run out of water if AI demand is not integrated into national water resource planning. And please do go and look up that statistic in the guide. I've really garbled it. Penalties for greenwashing and misleading sustainability claims. This is so important when so many public sector employers that you guys will work for, like councils, like care providers, all these smaller employers that aren't the overarching NHS or whatever, are making these procurement decisions themselves. Often our employers are having to go and procure AI and they don't really know what they're doing any more than we do. And it is very easy then for tech companies to make really big misleading sustainability claims that possibly well-meaning employers then go along with. So we need penalties for greenwashing and misleading sustainability claims. And lastly, the government should be leading by example and publishing annual digital sustainability reports as a matter of principle. And then last, we need to mobilise. And that's sort of the note I want to leave us on here, which is that we need to be actively participating in the campaigning work that is going on in this issue. So much of what we will be doing will be at the bargaining and workplace level, but we also have so much power as a union, as a voice on the UK stage, that I think we need to be, from our grassroots up to the very top of the organisation, saying that, and joining with organisations who are campaigning on these issues and saying that this is unacceptable. The environmental impact of AI is too big to be ignored, and we're not going to ignore it. That's it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, both of you. And I have to say that at points I was so engrossed I forgot to look at the questions, which was my actual job, which make sure that I had all the questions, but I have got them. I did keep on bringing myself back to them. So yeah, that's fantastic. And thank you for leaving enough time for the questions. And I'm not surprised that I didn't need to remind people in the middle to put their questions in. We have a lot of questions. So first off the bat, I'm just going to say that there is going to be the recording of this webinar. So at the very least, people can take screenshots of every single one of the slides just by moving along on the recording. But it may well be that we can actually send the slides out to people who'd registered as well. So I'll certainly follow up on that. But there's certainly going to be the recording of this webinar available as of tomorrow. So I'll move on to some of the specific questions. And I think actually there aren't ones that I can group easily, so I'm just going to go through them. So I've got Jessica asking very specifically, I guess, to Tom, who mentioned it, why do only half of all companies have the data, do you think?
Fabulous bloody question, to be honest, isn't it? Your guess is as good as mine. It may also be that, I mean, FOI is such a funny beast. It can be really useful in the stuff that you can get out of it, but the criteria by which parties or entities that have to respond do so is often unclear and is often arguable. You can sometimes take these things to a slightly more advanced. You can challenge the response you're given basically and try and fight back against it. But we felt that given the scale of, I mean, it was half the water companies in the country, we just didn't have time to challenge all of these different responses along with the rest of the work that we had to do. But I don't think the matter should be left to rest there. I mean, I think one of the things that would be incredibly exciting if, you know, a body that is as big and as powerful and has so much intelligence and knowledge as UNISON was involved, I think, like, let's not let that lie. Let's see what resources we can use to try and investigate that ourselves. I mean, there will be that information will be somewhere. It will just be that they have decided that they're not going to respond to Foxglove's FOI in that case. So it's an extremely good question.
And I guess the
and
call is to make sure they do publish this data regularly on a mandatory basis. That should be the sort of call that we
Exactly.
ask of them, I guess. Okay, so
Exactly.
I'm just going to go through some other ones here. So I guess this is a broader question from Jamie, who is Unison lead in a large academy trust, which has embraced AI technology, but they're asking about offsetting now. As far as I can see, offsetting the climate impacts and energy use of AI would be the same as offsetting any of their energy use. And so, in a sense, a lot of what we have in our bargaining guide about what things can get negotiated on in this forum of getting to net zero, which is all linked. But I don't know whether you had any sort of immediate ideas on that. If not, we can sort of refer to the sort of the general bargaining on, you know, mitigating impacts.
Was that on whether AI should be offset, essentially,
There's
was the
an
question.
employer who is willing to have discussions about how to offset. And so the members sort of saying, can you help? Are there any particular things that you know people have been doing to support that? And I think probably that would be the same for offsetting any increased energy use or energy use at all, which we have in our bargaining guide. So I'd guess unless you have anything particular experience of people offsetting, particularly for AI, then I guess we'd refer to that data. I've got another one specifically for you, Tom. Have you approached the Green Party, given they currently have such a high profile, and obviously it should be something that they're engaged on? And I know that Kate will be interested in that as well.
Not formally. No, we haven't. And I should also say that Foxglove is, you know, non-party political. We don't, like, you know, certainly have no affiliation with any particular political party. I would say in the 6 years that I've been at Foxglove, we've probably worked with everyone at some point or another. You know, so absolutely no what's the word? No reason we wouldn't at all. In fact, I've noticed that what I think one of the best economists working in the UK today, James Madaway, who used to be one of the chief advisors to John McDonnell when he was the Shadow Chancellor, has that new think tank, Verdant, that is doing research for the Green Party. And I think that is well worth looking at from all UNISON members. And I should say that I think James is one of the people, he's got an excellent weekly podcast on sort of economics in general, but in a much more interesting way than I've just made that sound. And it really is about, well, how does it make sense to me? And data centers, and particularly the climate impact data centers, is a particular hobby horse of James's. So I would very much recommend perhaps subscribing to that podcast. And I would say that if he keeps putting out that stuff with the new think tank to help inform Green's policy on this, I would imagine we shall certainly be in touch with them, yes.
So then another very hopefully quick yes or no question in a way. We have shared in the Q&A section Foxglove's website. Is there a sort of template MP letter on these issues that we can signpost people to there, and sort of a ready-made action that they can adopt from Foxglove?
Probably more than one, yes. Let me find the specific.
Well, we put the website in there, but so hopefully there possibly might be more than one if people take a look at that. So this is a question for either of you really, but Jonathan asks, given the heat emitted from data centers, can't they be resited to where the heat can be repurposed usefully?
I actually don't know enough about this. There is like a big thing that there are calls for data centers to be built more in like Nordic countries, and simply because the impact is less. But I think I shouldn't have started talking. Tom, this is your area. I'm gonna.
When I was talking about all these different sort of promises that are made in data center applications, but it's very hard to see if they're actually going to measure up or not. Some people do say this, so there's one, I believe it may be Elsham, that I remember saying that waste heat was going to be pushed into a massive new greenhouse in order to build, to build, grow new produce for the area. And again, that sounds great, but there's absolutely nothing that I can see that's been binding to show that they're actually going to do that. So it's a difficult question to answer, because I think it's the kind of question that is rooted in trying to find a sensible, good, practical use of this heat, which is absolutely the right thing to do. I suppose I'm skeptical that the data center companies are looking at it in such an altruistic way.
So the first stance would be it's not the right place to be putting them, but then if they are going to be here, then yes, are we going to be sensible about a circular use and serious use of the excess heat? I'm aware that a council, for instance, used their normal computer server centre to heat up their local municipal swimming pool. That was a few years ago now. So these things can happen, but will they, is going to be the question. So Andrew asked if we're speaking to the local government authority about this bargaining guide. I think the work that Kate's done, and this bargaining guide, I can't tell you how hot off the press it is, and we're really glad to see it. It's incredibly hot off the press. And we will absolutely be pushing that to all of our service groups for use and to take up those questions. Jessica asked whether, because we did mention sort of careful choices, is co-pilot a more sustainable option, because her employer has suggested that it is. Kate, I know that you sort of touched on this, so I'll pass that to you, I think.
I think I'm not under any. I don't believe Copilot is like. I don't know how it measures up to other LLMs. Basically, I actually don't know like where you'd rank the like commonly available large language models like Claude and ChatGPT, and I think that would be quite a hard question to ask, because it really depends on which individual model you're using within it, and then how you're using it. I think the question that really needs to be asked just more than that is like, how are you using it? Because which tool you use is actually so much less important than the way you use it. So the points I was making about writing everything up in one block, like write up your prompt in a Word document before you put it into a tool, just so everything you can possibly think of is included, and it produces it all on the first go, and it's done, and you don't need to do any more tweaking. Because like I said, every time you press enter onto those chats again, does all the thinking again, all the energy is used again. And you know, that I would argue is more important than which of the publicly available LLMs are being used at this point in time. Also, I'd say no. Microsoft's not great, but that's my personal opinion, not Unison's.
Okay, so I've got Dagmara, who's asked whether posters are going to be available on the sustainable, basically outlining the sustainable use and the issues that you've raised. Hot off the press as it is, I think that's an idea that certainly Kate and I can discuss with our comms team about whether we can produce something like that. So we'll take that away and think about it more. And then I've got Alexis, who asked whether, very specifically, the AI apprenticeships in the NHS, which I have to say I was unaware of, but there are apparently AI apprenticeships in the NHS. And so can we lobby for this guide to be one of the modules, or the issues raised in this guide to be part of their training? And I would say that's absolutely something we can pick up with our lead, our NHS lead, because I think that's a very sensible approach, rather like approaching the LGA was as well. And then sort of linked to that, and again, I don't know whether either of you are aware of this, but Carol asks, has there been an assessment of the new NHS AI tools? And she mentions two of them, Clinical Key being one, and there's up-to-date AI. So these are new models being brought in. Are we aware whether our advice to ensure that the issues are considered, that staff are consulted? I think... are you aware of them? This is something, again, we can talk to our health colleagues about.
I'm not aware of the specific tools, but from April 27, all NHS suppliers will be required to publish carbon reduction plans, and that does include Scope 3 emissions. So if it's not currently published, it will be soon. And it's, definitely something we'll be looking into. But this is something I actually want to make the point I always make. As a union, we are so big, we're so sprawling, we don't always hear what is being used on the ground in workplaces because there isn't any consultation happening. So how would our organisers find out about it? So there is a bit on the AI hub where you can write in, tell me anything that is happening with AI in your workplace. It can be positive, it can be negative. But the more information we have about AI tools that are being brought in and how they're affecting workers, the stronger position we'll be in. So please do write in and say this is being used, look into it, so then we can start looking into it.
I think that's a fantastic place to sort of leave it, really, and leaving it on what we can do and getting information from our members. I know that our members who work in the water industry and water companies are highly concerned about this and are doing work connected to this. There are consultations around exactly the issues you raised, Kate, about water supply being at risk. And of course, this is only just one of the issues of so many that we're raising during our year of green activity. So I knew this would be a great one because everyone, for the last year or so, ever since we talked about having a year of green activity to highlight the work we've been already doing, there hasn't been a single presentation we've done where we haven't had questions about, what about AI and the impact of AI? And at the beginning, a lot of people didn't understand the question. And I think, everyone understands the question now and needs to get on board with what mobilising and what we do about it. And it's great to see organisations like Foxglove and our own Unison doing so much to give people tools to join in that conversation and the activity around it. So I just want to finish the last minute just to remind people, if you are interested in what Unison's doing, we don't have it's quite new. I say it's quite new. We've always been involved on green activity. Green Unison has existed as a place where we have put everything we're doing on green issues for at least 8 years now. But I don't think many of our members have understood the quantity of work that me and my colleagues and UNISON in general have been doing on this area. So do have a look at the web pages. Do sign up to our Green UNISON newsletter, because it's pretty much the only way that you'll get the updates. And there are new guides like the one that was hot off the press today from Kate coming up all the time. We've released 4 new guides this year. There are always activities, events, and support for members, and an opportunity to communicate back with us. There's a link to an email that you can come back to, as Kate indicated, for her AI Hub as well. You can also respond to those newsletters, telling us what you're doing, asking questions, and giving us your feedback. So thanks everyone for giving your time, and thanks particularly, of course, to Kate and to Tom. As I say, this recording will be available from tomorrow, and we'll explore whether or not we can share the slides, but we have the technology to share the slides with everyone who registered. So thank you for your time, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks all so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.